Welcome everybody to the final dialogue session of 2024. Today we have 4 collectives reporting on their praxis about music and dance as reflexive action in times of environmental, socio-political, and economic crisis in Brazil, South Africa, Mozambique, and India. Let me first introduce the organizer of the roundtable. He is Brett Pyper. Brett Pyper is an interdisciplinary South African arts practitioner, cultural scholar, and former festival director. Since the early 1990s, he has combined critical arts practice with academic study at local, national, and international levels. He was head of the Wit School of Arts at the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, from 2014 to 2021, where he is currently an associate professor in curatorial, public, and visual cultures. So Brett will moderate this whole section, and he will now introduce the bilingual moderators and the different collectives before the videos are played. Yeah. Okay, over to you, Brett.
Thank you so much, Suibeng, and hello, colleagues, whether it's morning or afternoon or evening for you. We're really very honored as the 4 collectives to be part of this really important global dialogue, really, on decolonizing music and dance studies. We're very grateful to the ICTMD for offering us this opportunity. As you know from the program, our conversation between 4 collectives is titled Music and Dance as Reflexive Action in Times of Environmental, Socio-Political, and Economic Crisis. And we're going to be having this conversation across 4 geographies, but we see this as part of a much wider conversation. So we're going to have presentations from colleagues in Brazil, South Africa, Mozambique, and India. But as I say, we're really excited for this to be a conversation that extends beyond national boundaries. I'm going to say a very few words by way of introduction, and I'd also like to recognize with appreciation the presence of my colleague who is our bilingual moderator, Joaquim Borges Gove, who is in Mozambique, who some of you may know has in recent weeks, amidst the political unrest following a contested election, have been enduring various internet blackouts. So our colleagues in Mozambique have nonetheless managed to produce a video, send it to us, and I'm delighted that Borges has been able to join us today. He's a lecturer of music pedagogy and didactics at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo in Mozambique, and he's also a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town. Borges, if you'd like to wave to the group, it's very nice to see you. And there are going to be opportunities in the Q&A, of course, to pose questions in Portuguese or English, and I'm very grateful for your contribution. So very briefly, to get us going, I'd like to also honor someone who is with us virtually today, and that is our esteemed colleague, Professor Samuel Araújo, who we of course know as someone who over at least the last 3 decades has been very influential in bringing many of the principles and philosophies of the radical Brazilian philosopher of education, Paulo Freire, into the space of research into music and dance. And over the years, Professor Araújo and I have had various conversations about how that legacy from Brazil has a profound footprint, really, in cultural struggle in South Africa. And at the World Music Conference, at the World Conference of the ICTM, as it was known then, in Bangkok in 2019, he and I had a conversation that it almost seemed that in the political environment of the present, then in Brazil, I would say it's even more the case now globally, we need to be revisiting these histories of struggle and the ideas that inform them. And so I'm very grateful to Prof. Araújo for putting me in touch with a colleague who is present today and will be presenting, Pedro Mendonça, who is in Brazil, and the collective that he works with is going to be our first group of presenters. They're largely going to introduce themselves through this presentation, and I'll offer a few brief words of introduction then. We're going to go from our Brazilian collective to our Mozambican one, to two South African ones, one that's primarily non-academic, and we're going to end with an academic presentation. And we look forward to engaging with you in the Q&A afterwards. So Carlos, with that, I'm going to hand over to play the first video. Thank you so much.
Oi, gente, meu nome é Aline. Eu vou falar um pouco sobre os sentidos da palavra quilombo e de organizações quilombistas. Bom, quilombo é uma palavra de origem no tronco linguístico banto que assumiu diversos sentidos ao longo da história. De acordo com Joseph Miller, o termo é de origem umbundo. Já para outros, como Beatrix Hentze, é de origem quimbundo. Destaco aqui o estudo linguístico da pesquisadora afro-brasileira Miri Fernandes Maquiesse, a qual afirma que a origem do termo é quicongo. Entretanto, todos os estudos mencionados descrevem o quilombo como uma aldeia, cidade cercada ou instituição militar. No contexto da África pré-colonial, aproximadamente no século XVI, o termo designa sociedades abertas a iniciados, sendo quilombo o nome do local onde eram realizados os ritos de iniciação. Dentre os inúmeros sentidos que podem ser encontrados para a palavra em diversas línguas banto, podemos destacar no quicongo como algum dos sentidos do prefixo ki, formado pelas palavras ka e, a ideia de essência de um ser. E para o sufixo lombo, vindo da raiz ilombe, a ideia de santuário. Nesse sentido, o quilombo pode ser entendido como um local sagrado, onde cultivamos a essência do nosso ser. A referência aqui utilizada no campo da história são os estudos da historiadora afro-brasileira Beatriz Nascimento. Bom, no século XX, já no contexto da diáspora africana, o intelectual ativista Abdias Nascimento denominou quilombismo as várias formas de organização social e política de resistência cultural negra. Tais organizações podem ser encontradas em diversos territórios, como em escolas de samba, terreiros de candomblé, rodas de capoeira, grupos de teatro negro, entre outras organizações, formadas a partir de diferentes processos de aquilombamento. E é através do diálogo com esses sentidos da palavra quilombo e de organizações quilombistas que é possível começar a entender a proposta da Escola Quilombista Dandara dos Palmares.
Favela vem dizer, a rua vem dizer, é nós por nós. Hoje o quilombo vem dizer, favela vem dizer, a rua vem dizer, é nós por nós. Papo reto nosso, vou te passar a visão, já que a real não se vê na televisão. Essa mídia tem um lado, ser porta-voz do Estado, como muitos nos ferrando, se passando de aliado. É chegada a hora os divergentes se juntar, partimos do caô, não há quem possa segurar.
Olá, eu sou Carol Lucena, professora de artes e representante nessa apresentação da Escola Quilombista Dandara de Palmares, que fica no Complexo do Alemão, no Rio de Janeiro. Nossa escola é formada por uma maioria de pessoas que nasceram aqui nas favelas do Complexo do Alemão. A mestra Zilda Chaves, a nossa matriarca, uma mulher preta e avó do Complexo do Alemão, define a nossa escola como sendo o nosso quilombo, um núcleo familiar levando ao nosso território caminhos através de uma pedagogia de reeducação e criação. Ela afirma em seu livro recém-lançado que, juntos nesse processo de afeto e compromisso, sentimos a urgência de nos aquilombar e assim nos organizamos para nos mantermos vivos dentro de um sistema com forte essência colonialista, sem nenhum pudor para nos exterminar. Nosso viver dia a dia o quilombismo na prática é ter compromisso coletivo de nos ajudarmos no desenvolvimento físico, material, mental e espiritual, para que os nossos pequenos saibam que temos nossas histórias, nossos heróis, somos herdeiros de uma cultura rica, cheia de ritmos e movimentos. E ela continua: entendemos que nossa favela hoje vive um novo jeito de reeducar. E mesmo com toda a tecnologia da atualidade, nós ainda acreditamos nas práticas do quilombismo, apresentado por Abdias Nascimento em 1980 e por Beatriz Nascimento em 1989. Precisamos nos sentir e pensar como uma única família, com compromisso, respeito, cuidados e muito afeto. Zilda Chaves, recentemente, lançou seu primeiro livro de título Tia, tem escolinha hoje?, que conta o processo de criação coletiva da Escola Quilombista Dona de Palmares, aqui no Complexo do Alemão. É impossível para nós pensar em quilombismo e na nossa história sem o pensamento circular proposto pelo mestre quilombola Antônio Bispo dos Santos, conhecido por Nego Bispo. Para ele, somos começo, meio e começo. A Escola Quilombista Dona de Palmares nasceu na necessidade urgente de oferecer uma educação que dialogasse com a realidade das crianças pretas do Complexo do Alemão, valorizando suas identidades e promovendo a conscientização política e social desde a infância, resgatando ou fortalecendo sua humanidade ou prepará-los para a vida coletiva e a atuação política rumo à transformação radical do mundo. A escola encontrou na educação libertadora uma poderosa ferramenta de transformação social, onde quem ensina também aprende e se transforma na busca por transformação. A escola foi inspirada pelo movimento comunitário Ocupa Alemão, que é o começo, Ocupa Alemão, que nasceu a partir do assassinato de um jovem de 18 anos na favela, em 2012, pela Polícia Militar do Rio de Janeiro. Como Zilda diz, a escola respira a energia da guerra. O Ocupa Alemão foi um movimento que lutava contra a violência racial e policial, a falta de oportunidades e a exclusão que marcam a vida nas favelas. A escola não é apenas um movimento político, é também uma rede de solidariedade e apoio, onde todos os envolvidos se ajudam mutuamente e constroem alternativas para enfrentar os desafios do cotidiano, tanto das crianças quanto dos adultos envolvidos com a sua formação. No caso, sua família e os professores criadores da nossa escola. Oferecemos não apenas reforço escolar, o letramento se dá a partir de atividades culturais e lúdicas, como aulas de música, xadrez, artes, dança, capoeira, além de vivências e passeios, debates e palestras e saraus. Essas práticas estão integradas ao currículo com o objetivo de estimular o pensamento crítico, a criatividade, o senso de coletividade e a capacidade de reflexão crítica e radical sobre as contradições do mundo. Os jovens envolvidos com o movimento Ocupa Alemão em 2012 são hoje, em 2024, os professores da nossa escola. Por isso, nós somos o começo, o meio e o começo. O pensamento circular de Nego Bispo nos oferece uma perspectiva contracolonial de pensar e criar o nosso cotidiano. Somos a continuidade dos nossos ancestrais. Ancestralidade e matricentralidade são fundamentais abordagens na construção de uma escola quilombista, onde o cuidado mútuo é a base do amor comunitário revolucionário, esse que nos foi tirado a oportunidade de viver desde a fundação do colonialismo. Portanto, ser quilombo para nós é construir uma base forte de valorização dos nossos conhecimentos ancestrais, corporais, territoriais. É também criar um lugar onde podemos promover mudanças com autonomia e praticar o nosso saber orgânico. O quilombismo, para Abdias Nascimento, é uma oportunidade para codificar nossas experiências por nós mesmos, sistematizá-las, interpretá-las e tirar desse ato todas as lições teóricas e práticas conforme a perspectiva exclusiva dos interesses da nossa população, no caso, negra, favelada e contracolonial.
Eu ingressei no doutorado, em 2014, etnografia das práticas musicais. Ainda não sabia muito bem os rumos, que eu ia tomar, mas eu tinha certeza de que eu gostaria de aprofundar uma coisa que eu vinha aprendendo ao longo dos anos, que era a questão da pesquisação participativa, que estava agora com o orientador certo, que era o professor Samuel Araújo, que era também um especialista, um praticante dessa metodologia. Eu já de cara queria uma bolsa de doutorado, porque meu objetivo era trabalhar enquanto fazia o doutorado, e pegar essa bolsa e formar um grupo, né? Transformar essa bolsa em outras bolsas, dividir ela e chamar jovens pesquisadores de algum contexto que eu achasse interessante para pesquisa. Ao longo desse tempo eu fui conhecendo um espaço que eu fui me encantando muito, né? Me apaixonando, que era o Sarau Divergente, que acontecia no centro da cidade, do Rio de Janeiro, em frente à ocupação Manuel Congo, uma vez por mês, e tinha como mestre de cerimônias o Mano Teco, né? MC de funk, que eu já conhecia da época dos anos 90, alguns sucessos, mas que eu reconheci de novo agora nessa figura de militante, político, né, das causas do funk, das causas do povo negro, e fui me interagindo com o Sarau e fui gostando muito de estar, e fui me aproximando. Um ano depois que eu entrei, me ligaram dizendo que eu tinha conseguido a bolsa de doutorado, e foi quando eu pude, de fato, planejar esse grupo que eu queria fazer. Então, durante alguns meses, eu fui conversando com pessoas e convidando jovens atuantes no Sarau, que eu achei que faria diferença socioeconômica, né, ter a bolsa por pessoas jovens assim, em situação de desemprego, início de vida profissional.
Então, o grupo surgiu na defesa do doutorado do Pedro, né, fez o convite pra gente no Sarau Divergente. No começo tinha outra configuração, éramos eu, Jennifer e Matheus, né, no grupo, componente. Foi isso, assim, a gente já fazia parte do Sarau, né, não sei se a Ju já falou um pouco, que era um sarau que surgiu depois do rompimento de alguns funkeiros com a APA Funk. E aí com esse rompimento surgiu o sarau e a gente decidiu pegar essa galera, né, se juntar. E teve o convite individual, mas lá dentro do sarau a gente já se conhecia de vista, mas a gente nunca tinha conversado, né, se aprofundado e tal, porque cada um morava em uma localidade diferente, né. A Jennifer era de uma comunidade que tinha outra facção, né, da minha. Tinha isso, né? E aí a gente acabou interagindo e tal. E aí o grupo partiu disso, né? Depois da defesa, né? A gente, depois de ter defendido e tal, a gente decidiu continuar com o grupo, fazer produções, né? Produzir alguns textos, né? Alguns textos focados nessa parte da etnomusicologia.
E ele era voltado mais a uma pesquisa em etnomusicologia afrodiaspórica, explorando esses lados e tal. E acabou se ampliando e se estendendo por diante do território, ocupando diversas funções, que é o que acho que predomina hoje em dia, né?
Então, o grupo Dona, Ivone e Lara, ele é um grupo de pesquisa, que na verdade, ele se iniciou como um grupo de pesquisa, né? Mas hoje a gente está muito mais ligado à prática, porque a gente não acredita em pesquisa que não tem uma prática, né? Que não tenha como foco tudo aquilo que a gente acredita, que tem a base racial dentro do nosso território, que ele esteja agindo dentro do nosso território.
Bom, sobre metodologia, eu sem dúvida nenhuma acho que o Grupo Musicultura, né, lá na Maré, que existe até hoje, ligado ao FRJ, coordenado pelo professor Samuel, que também era meu orientador, foi uma primeira grande inspiração. Por debater assuntos, né, relacionados à realidade do povo favelado, com o protagonismo, né, dos moradores. Mas ao longo do nosso processo, a gente foi criando uma ideia meio própria de pensamento. Na tese, a gente não conseguiu fugir de ir para a pesquisação participativa porque a gente não tinha muito tempo, mas a gente ia se desenvolvendo, lendo coisas novas, conversando com outras pessoas e ia percebendo que a gente vivia um momento acadêmico diferente, de novas ideias, de novas pessoas, de novos protagonismos. Então hoje, eu vou dizer, né, que a gente tem falado que faz uma pesquisa comunitária.
E hoje a gente pensa muito nisso, assim, a gente está bem fora da universidade, a gente já teve convite de outros grupos, de congressos, de coisas, e a gente tem negado, assim, a gente tem focado muito nessa coisa da escola, de aprender, né, de ensinar. Acho que é bem isso.
Que a atividade do grupo ela passou a ser muito mais prática do que acadêmica, do que teórica, sabe? E a partir disso daí a gente tentou desenvolver ações práticas de relevância assim para nossa comunidade como um todo. Porque antes, claro que a pesquisa é uma parada importante e tal, só que eu acho que não é tão abrangente como um todo, assim, na realidade prática mesmo da parada, sabe, mano? Eu acho que esse ponto ele foi determinante pra gente chegar onde que nós tá agora, com oficina de instrumento, com aula, com produção do nosso estúdio, tá ligado? Pra nós poder trazer a cultura de fato pra quem tá precisando, tá ligado? E não deixar uma parada nichada da forma que entende. Eu acho que isso daí é um...
Tipo assim, a parte da pesquisa, a gente tem reuniões, a gente conversa, a gente tenta ajustar meio que o grupo de pesquisa às demandas daqui. Aí meio que o grupo de pesquisa fica responsável tanto pela parte da pesquisa mesmo, da gente tratar, discutir, conversar sobre as questões que vão acontecendo, tanto das demandas, porque dentro do próprio grupo a gente criou demandas para fazer, tipo, a gente tem um sarau para fazer, quem vai cuidar do sarau? Tem a parte musical, tem outras, entendeu? A gente vai nessa dinâmica. Dentro do próprio grupo, a gente se organiza dentro do grupo para cumprir outras demandas daqui do coletivo e algumas coisas também externas que também tem a ver tanto com o coletivo quanto com o grupo de pesquisa.
Então, atualmente a gente trabalha aqui com as aulas de musicalização, não só isso, tem as aulas de capoeira também. Estamos fazendo o nosso estúdio aqui, que ele já existia, só que no outro ponto. A gente também está mexendo com a construção de instrumentos africanos ancestrais. E ainda rola um lance de pesquisa ainda acadêmica. E isso tudo começou como uma necessidade mesmo, né?
Realmente, no coletivo a gente tem a demanda do sarau, que eu sou o produtor. A gente tem uma conexão com alguns outros, um outro coletivo, que tem a ver com o... Caraca, eu esqueci, me fugiu lá, o Espírito Santo. Que é músico preto fora de série. Tem o nosso amigo lá, o Ygor, que ele está envolvido lá com eles. A gente tem algumas questões também. A banda Proceder, que tem a ver com o coletivo, a gente produz... Tá fazendo música para uma rapper local aqui, que é a Liz MC. A gente também, nesse sarau, a gente acompanha um cantor de funk, o Mano Teco, que é amigo nosso também, parceiro também das antigas. Aí é isso, a gente tem essas demandas aí, a gente tem essas questões, tanto com o sarau quanto com outras questões do coletivo.
A gente está lá muito dentro de um grupo que é de cultura, porque na escola tem a galera da arte é muito forte, principalmente na música. Tem muitos professores de música, muitos mesmo, todos vieram do lugar ali do pré-THE, vieram desse lugar, antes do pré-THE, do Ocupa Rock, do coletivo Ocupa Alemão. E aí a gente está sempre dentro, confluindo mais com esses grupos que são ligados à cultura, realmente.
E eu acho que para a etnomusicologia vai ser muito isso. Vamos nos organizar, né? A última apresentação nossa foi musical, a gente não fez texto. Decidimos, enquanto grupo, fazer uma apresentação, que foi uma coisa também que a gente viu muito na África do Sul, assim. Que para eles o ensinar, a música tinha não é separado. A gente não vai sentar aqui e te ensinar e depois vai ter a música. Não, a gente vai sentar, a música vai começar e você vai aprendendo, você vai vendo. Eles não vão te falar assim, aquele passo de dança. Não, as coisas vão acontecendo e você tá no meio e você vai aprendendo, vai absorvendo. Acho que é muito isso que a gente trouxe, né? E também, assim, a construção diferente, né? De você ter a sua liberdade de não... eu vou, não sei, assim, vou dar um exemplo, né? Musicalmente, eu vou fazer um acorde aqui. Não, um acorde é formado por todo mundo. Eu não vou escolher o acorde. Eu vou dar uma nota e a pessoa vai dar uma nota e isso vai sendo construído coletivamente, sabe? Acho que é por aí.
E a gente construiu uma relação ali de conversar sobre os nossos grupos irem até lá para conversar pessoalmente um pouco sobre o que a gente estava fazendo no Brasil e também conhecer os grupos sul-africanos que estavam lá articulados com a universidade. Quando a gente chegou lá, a gente teve um trabalho, né? A gente deu alguns workshops, fez alguns shows, alguns concertos com hip hop, funk, com o que a gente trazia daqui, mas a gente também conheceu muitas iniciativas incríveis. Então, por exemplo, ter ido a um encontro, uma jam, né, que era o Dona Jam Session, que acontecia no bairro do Soweto, uma township, né, de Joanesburgo, foi muito motivador pra gente, por exemplo, abrir a nossa escola Kilombista, que na época já era nesse espaço, para fazer um evento também, né, que não seria semanal como eles, a gente sabia que não tinha pena, mas mensal. Demorou 1 ano e meio pra gente fazer o primeiro, porque a gente ali pensando, refletindo como é que a gente vai fazer isso em termos conceituais e tal, mas aquilo impactou a gente pra caramba. E a gente voltou muito provocado. Outra grande provocação, a organização comunitária que eles tinham para pensar arte e cultura em uma outra comunidade, que era a Mamelodi. A gente, nossa, caraca, que incrível que esses caras fazem, esses mais velhos, olha o conhecimento que eles têm da sua ancestralidade, como que isso impacta, né, na ideia de patrimônio cultural daquele território, como eles valorizam, e voltamos para cá também muito provocados. Estamos em andamento disso, né, de pensar o Complexo Alemão como patrimônio. Tem outras organizações locais, né, tem um coletivo local aqui chamado Cultura Viva, CPX, que mistura outras organizações de cultura, que a gente está inserido, então está motivando, a gente tem pensado em iniciativas, um centro cultural, então a gente está motivado também nessa articulação territorial, né, a gente construir coisas também similares. E qual foi a outra coisa também que... e a Academia de Música, a Academia de Artes Lutando, né, que foi uma iniciativa que a gente conheceu numa outra comunidade chamada Sebokeng, ali na liderança do Luiano esse dia, que veio com a companhia pra cá ano passado, né, a gente conseguiu organizar uma turnê de 15 dias com essa companhia sul-africana, apresentaram aqui o espetáculo deles 4 vezes, em 3 cidades diferentes do Brasil, né, Paraty, Rio de Janeiro e Vitória, e foi motivado por essa nossa relação. Quem fez o pontapé fomos nós, né, nesse relacionamento com eles, e que esse ano certamente se desenvolve, já estamos debatendo eles virem de novo, né, o governo sul-africano envolvido, conceder mais passagens, então virou uma grande rede de articulação que pode futuramente também promover o nosso retorno até lá. Então, eu vejo hoje, além, né, do estúdio comunitário, que é muito importante, ele está em obra agora, mas quando ele voltar vai ter movimento, eu vejo hoje uma articulação entre produção, educação e fazer artístico, composição, música e tal, que acontece muito, por exemplo, dentro da banda, Proceder, né, os diversos artistas que a gente atua. E pesquisa ainda está muito forte na relação com o Mestre Espírito Santo. que aí é uma pesquisa, né, voltada aos materiais, instrumentos musicais africanos, essa ancestralidade musical, né, que a África, né, coloca aqui no Brasil, que é evidente, mas que tem suas minúcias, e o mestre conhece muito, ensina muito para nós. A gente já está envolvido como assistente num projeto, como produtor no outro, no trabalho dele. Então hoje a gente está produzindo esse monte de coisa aí com o grupo, né?
Thank you so much, Carlos, for the first video. And so, colleagues, you would see that there are a range of practices that come to the fore in our work, especially as the presentations continue. Apart from education and responding to immediate community needs, there's also a strong investment in building a public sphere. And typically a public sphere in communities that are excluded from mainstream music industry venues and platforms. And you will see as we go on that there's a dialogue at the level of practice as well as the level of theory. Thank you again to our wonderful colleagues from Brazil. So I mentioned earlier, for anyone who's joined us subsequently, that our conversation began through the kind facilitation of Professor Samuel Araujo, and we were able to invite some colleagues from Rio de Janeiro to come to Johannesburg and surrounding areas in 2022. And we've subsequently been keeping our dialogues alive through online engagements. And during one of our presentations at an ICTM then, Applied Ethnomusicology conference, our colleague Borges Gove from Mozambique came to know us and has become part of our conversation. So as we go, although there'll be lots of references to the exchanges thus far between South Africa and Brazil, conversations with colleagues in Mozambique and also later with India will become part of our presentations. Our second video then comes from our colleagues in Mozambique in the collective known as Riamos, which will be introduced. I'll just mention initially that we've received apologies from our colleague Luca Macavele, who's unfortunately unwell at the moment. But Mikash Shilambo is with us in the meeting. He is going to be traveling later. We hope that he'll be able to take some input during the Q&A. But I'd like to again just acknowledge the presence of the facilitator of this group, who doesn't introduce himself in the video, and that is Joaquim Borges Gove, who, as I said earlier, is a lecturer in music pedagogy and didactics at Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo in Mozambique, and is also a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town. And with that, we'll move to our second video. Thank you.
Boa tarde, Professor Luca. Boa tarde, Professor Mikas. Good afternoon, Luca and Mikas. Good afternoon to Sound Practice Collective.
Hello, good afternoon.
To the Sound Practice colleagues and their collectives. And good afternoon to the ICTMD Dialogues collectives. This is the Riamos. Riamos stands for Re-valorização, Intervenção e Ação Musical in Portuguese, and in English is Re-valorization, Intervention and Musical Action. This collective, Riamos, is supported by a big idea, which is on starting a new debate on the concepts of cultural preservation and conservation, which is broadly known, and most times we think this is being decolonial, this is being valuing the cultures that have been oppressed by the colonial effects. But however, I believe, and we, this collective, believe that the coloniality has more to do with engaging with new discourses and questioning the old imperial discourses and narratives. So I'll have here Dr. Luca, who will speak about sustainable education and peace building through decolonized research, teaching, and intervention in Mozambique. And also, Dr. Luca definitely works with musical traditional or indigenous musical instruments from Mozambique, trying to go beyond what they can do, and it's thought they must be preserved. He's one who defends that preserving is a kind of putting these practices in a museum where they can only by seeing but not explore it, and they also cannot explore the wider environment, musical and cultural environments. While Dr. Nikas will address coloniality, decoloniality on the terminologies of Mbira, because Mbira has gone through so many terminologies like piatam, piano, something like that. And we try always to bring new terminologies, and sometimes we still engage in coloniality, thinking that we are decolonizing. This will be Dr. Mika's discussion. So each of them will have 7 to 8 minutes, since we have very limited time. Thank you for the two of you. Let's take our discussion, starting with Dr. Mikas. Thank you.
Thank you, ICTMD, for giving me the opportunity to meet there's musical arts researcher Joaquim Borges and Luca Mcavel, and others who watch us on digital platform. Nshikani, good afternoon. Well, my small contribution to this panel is about, as it said, Borges, coloniality and decoloniality on Mbira's terminology. The Mbira, the musical instrument you will see in few African invention, and I will return to this in a moment. For now, I must say that in 1978, the American ethnomusicologist Dumisan Abraham Marair said that people from the same culture that supports missionary education in Africa continually refer to Mbira in ethnocentric terms such as thumb piano, hand piano, and finger piano. Well, this keeps going to our days. I want to take advantages of this discussion window to remember two things. Next slide, please. The first is that the invention of Aprisembalo, which is the piano prototype, is considered to be somewhere between 1698 and 1699, and it is credited to the Italian Bartolomeo Cristoforo. However, it was only introduced to the public in 79 as a pianoforte, a name that later was shortened to piano. On the other hand, the researcher called Kubik, he supports the idea that that Mbira seems to have been invented twice in Africa. The first Mbira, made from wood or bamboo, was found on the west coast of Africa about 3,000 years ago, while the second, a metal-made lamellophone, was found in Zambe's River about 1,300 years ago. Without elaborating that much, I can say that the use of European terminology such as piano in Mbira's nomenclature is like any attempt to adapt to the universality and globalization. Therefore, it is like a cultural mold promoted by Europeans and incorporated by colonized Africans, who continue supporting this missionary education in Africa. This is exactly what I call coloniality in Mbira's terminology. The coloniality of knowledge is based, says Anibal Kijan, on the repression of other non-European forms of knowledge production, tending to then the intellectual and historical legacy of other people, such as indigenous people, Africans, reducing them to empty as a primitive and irrational for belonging to another race. Nothing legitimizes considering the Mbira has finger pian, thumb pian, or hand pian. Why? Because this musical instrument has its own names, I mean African names, such as Mbira Zawadzim, Mbira Zawandau, Mbira Nyinganyunga, Kalimba, Urimba, Shitata, Sanze. We move. So each of these names, they carries cultural meanings. For example, Jackie Tampera coined the term Mbira Nyunganyunga to mean that he obtained and learned this instrument from Nyungwe musician in Africa. So I see that by using this name, we will have the opportunity to talk about the culture of Nyungwe ethnic group, where are they located, how do they live, why they adopt a certain lifestyle, what are their musical art and other aspects are. I think by adopting African names for African musical instrument, we will be reacting to the epistemic and the imperial cultural bomb. This reaction agrees with the practice of decoloniality, which consists of all process of resistance and struggle in defense of people's symbols, ways of life, practice, musical instrument, and musical arts. Now I'm quoting Gove Akau, who says that learning to pronounce these names would encourage familiarity with the phonetic system of other language, open windows to other patterns of discourse within individual culture, and it cut the tendency to employ metropolitan category over the indigenous one. You stop a minute on that slide. I want the previous one, please. I want to focus on another more anthropological point now. Dumsan Abraham Marair has said that, has described the Mbira keys personifying their relationship to each other and to the instrument as a whole. He called the lowest pitch on the instrument the father, the pitch and octave above that the mother, and the pitch and octave above that one the child. According to this conceptualization, the rest of the keys, they comprised 4 similar families of keys, each with a mother and child or twins children. I mean, 2 keys with the same pitch. There was one key on the instrument that doesn't belong to any of this family. That key, Marair called as a black sheep or independent note. I understand that musical reveals through Mbira how most African families and social groups function. I mean, the father is the key player, the mother is the second, and the children flexibly, they overlap this reality. This structure does not mean, of course, exercising a power of authority or silencing over the other. After all those keys are considered as a member of a certain family. I mean, various Mbira sound frequencies that are intertwined rhythmically, melodically, harmonically to form collaboratively a song, a family that openly intervenes in various situations of life. It is like a Ubuntu, which says that my individual musical contribution makes musical sense only in the context of the quality of other individuals. So I'm ending now. We can ask how we can reduce the coloniality of cultural knowledge. The answer is the availability, your availability. You must apply decolonial action. Use African names, Afrocentric names, their musical instrument, their theory and philosophy. Thank you. Next, we have some. Obrigado.
Thank you, Mikas. I'm sorry to ask you to rush, but the thing is just that we have this time thing with the technologies, and otherwise our video probably won't be played within the time frame agreed. Dr. Dr. Luca, are you going to share yourself, right? You are muted. Dr. Luca, you are muted. You are muted. We can't listen to you. Oh, okay. Now.
Okay. Now, yeah. Yeah. Give me the sharing facility, and then I can share.
It's on. You can just go ahead, and your 7 minutes is starting now.
No, stop. I just start projecting. Can you pause it? Então, eu quero partilhar, chat, share participants, share screen. Okay. Okay, so here I will be talking about sustainable education and peace building through decolonized research, teaching, and intervention in Mozambique. As you know, decolonization is a detriment that is very much alive in all colonized countries. People sometimes talk of post-colonial or former colonies, and colonization continues, and this has been always my concern. So to start off, my area is musicology. I actually started this by redefining the concept itself of musicology, understanding, taking musicology from another perspective and not from the packaged and preconceived concepts, ideas that have been there built that only highlight Western musicology. Here, simply by saying that musicology is the understanding of the logic of music, it means that you have to dive into that music to learn its logic, its modes of operation. And then only thereafter you can talk of it. To say you start from community, research should be conceived from the experience of the problems in reality in the communities, and then be taken to the classroom. That's what I hear. Try to project. And also the fact that we do not really have much literature on our music, so it's important that we really take this from the logic of the music as it's practiced in the communities. So let's move on. Moving on from here, I would like to demonstrate another. Okay, I want to take you over to this pyramid here. This pyramid is also my guiding scheme, whereby I always place tradition at the bottom, at the fundament, as the foundation of everything else that we do. And then on top of tradition, culture comes. Culture integrates tradition and the contemporary and what happens around us. And science, ultimately, science comes on top of culture. We have to understand that science is produced by culture, by the human interaction, daily interaction with the environment, and that's what I try to represent here. So, talking about learning, for instance, about learning from reality, I went far to this. This is one way in which I try to understand the logic of the music from the Nyunga Mbira. Actually, as it says, I here tried to look at it also from a contemporary perspective. We cannot shy away from using all these concepts, new concepts, contemporary, whichever culture they come from. The wheel has been invented, and we can use it. We do not necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. It's there. If it functions, fine. If it doesn't function, then we can think of reinventing it. So for me, this served as a ground to decolonize musicology in this sense here. We can see that was the ground actually for the elaboration of this course here. This is a course that I was entitled to design at the University of Music, Franz Liszt Weimar. So when you want to talk of decolonized content, what is that? Decolonized content, of course, we look at the music, at all aspects of music from an African perspective, as the ethnogeographical background of the music of Africa. It's an African perspective to look at that, to experience it, and all those elements therein, which I will not necessarily go through each one of them due to time, but we can look at it and we can talk later about any of those, how they came to be. And here, I want to, so the paper that I'm right now presenting seeks to examine how decolonized research, teaching, and intervention can support sustainable education, peace building, and development in Mozambique. It's true that if you want development, you need peace. And if you want peace, if you want decolonized education, because colonized education was not aimed to contribute for any development in Mozambique, it was rather intended to perpetuate subjugation, whereby Mozambique as a colony continues to serve the colonizer, providing raw materials and all of those things. And going further, and some findings, some preliminary findings from this research are that through indigenous music and instrument studies, strengthen cultural identity and reduce social tensions. The crafting and use of traditional instruments fosters community engagement and provide sustainable career paths. Many, as we might, in Mozambique, we've seen quite a lot of people who made their career from on the grounds of this research, of this first-hand research experience. And today they are really doing well in their career. And this lowers the unemployment rate and pressure on the system. One example that I also like to bring is this instrument in the process of experimental research and recycling of otherwise rubbish, otherwise useless, otherwise pollution in our environment. As we see, this instrument here is a function of a double bass instrument. It's called ndondoza. Ndondoza, I gave it this name because undondoza in the Shangani language means to produce a deep voice. So the instrument produces a deep voice. In fact, it sings in that deep voice.
So with that beautiful deep voice, I want to thank our colleagues from Mozambique who, again, as I said earlier, worked under very difficult circumstances to make a video while the internet was shut down for a lot of the time in Mozambique in recent weeks, which also meant that there wasn't really time to edit some of the kind of live interactions that happen on Zoom calls. Thank you again, colleagues. We move next to some of our colleagues who have become part of our sound praxis conversations from outside of academic settings. And of course, community-based education for music and dance has already emerged in both of the first two presentations as a very important common concern. One of the really wonderful aspects of this ongoing set of dialogues within our groups is that practitioners have been brought into contact with one another directly. So it was really fantastic to bring educators from favela schools, like the one we saw in the first video, to South Africa to engage with colleagues doing extraordinary work in schools in South Africa in township areas that have traditionally, quite deliberately under apartheid policy, had no arts education. And so our next video features two wonderful music and dance schools. The one is an organization called Creative Artists. They will be introduced from Mamelodi, just to the east of Pretoria, by Jesse Mohale. Kafka is the abbreviation for the group, and we will also have a presentation from the Lutando Arts Academy. We had the pleasure of taking our Brazilian visitors to a professional dance production at the State Theatre in Pretoria that featured this group, and then we were able later in the week to visit their music and dance school, which resonated very profoundly for our Brazilian colleagues. And in fact, Lutando has been one of the beneficiaries of our exchanges. They've already been to Brazil, and in fact are in São Paulo as we speak today on the 16th of November. And I'm hoping that by the time we have our Q&A, they'll be able to join us from São Paulo. Just to let you know that we felt it was important for these videos also to share our praxis. You've already had a glimpse in the first video of musicking and teaching in Brazil. And so this particular video clip is going to end with about a 5-minute extract of the extraordinary contemporary dance and music production called Amawetu that Lutando Arts Academy has presented in both South Africa and Brazil. And so with that, I give you our third video. Thank you, Carlos.
Umhlaba akona wabantu abantu bangumhlaba ngobani abantu madoda idibane.
Yeah, well, I can go back to the sessions we had. Like I mentioned, how it opened me up to the writings of Paulo Freire and Samuel Arunjo, and their approach to teaching, basically. What actually was amazing, I mean, he speaks about the banking system of the method of teaching, where the teacher assumes to be the custodian of information and knowledge. And then it was quite interesting because in most of my presentation, I tell the students that the reason why I'm standing in front of them is not because I'm the most talented. It's because I was informed, exposed to the music before them. See, but I do acknowledge that amongst them, there are kids who are more talented than myself. And then one learner came to me and said, that's the first thing I've ever heard from a teacher. And I said, the teacher will never tell you that, because the teacher wants superiority over you. And then I try to move away from that superiority, because this is about sharing, this is about me showing you stuff, you know. It's not more about me being the teacher, yeah. And the fact that I was never formally trained, I think I'm actually better positioned to take that stand, you know. So that was actually, I found Paulo Freire supporting something that I mentioned before, even I read his works. And then I think in a normal day-to-day schooling, the teachers, if they could be exposed to those teachings and doctrines, that would be of benefit for all of us, I mean the teachers and the students. Yeah. For me, one cannot separate the work that I do as a music practitioner, as a music performer, as an educator, from the challenges in the society. So the music actually helps in terms of bringing everyone closer to the level of consciousness where you are at, and then how can you use music as a transformative instrument, and also how can you use music to uplift the children from disadvantaged communities so that they feel worthy, that they are something, they can be somebody. They don't need to be from an affluent family to make it to the top, And for me, that has been a very inspiring notion, and then a greater point of focus for me.
Wonderful. Any last note you'd like to share, or is that it?
Well, the last words to share is that there's hope. There's hope, and we just have to keep on doing the best we can, and also exposing our learners that they should think beyond the borders of South Africa. The idea of partnership can do better, or they can benefit a lot. I mean, already this partnership that has been that emanated from this in Brazil, and then there's lots of potentials. I am a strong believer of partnerships, and then beyond the borders of South Africa.
Thank you so much for your participation in this partnership.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I think I will also pick up from things that I realized from our previous trip in Brazil, and how it has also made me look at things differently, my approach in terms of development, especially for the young ones. My work, I'll speak about 2019, we created Amawetu, which is really looking at distortions, in our politics, in how things look like they're really not the way they are. And above and beyond that, when we got to Brazil, I then realized that they have all these books about Marcus Garvey that they are teaching the little ones, and then they're feeding them with so much information about the history of Abantu, the history of the black people, and it moved me so much that when I came back home, I remember one Saturday I surprised them in the studio, because often I do not work Saturdays, and I came through and I requested to have just an hour with the little ones, and I started asking them about simple things such as how many of you know Winnie Madikizela Mandela? And guess what? All of them were talking about Nelson Mandela. No, we know Mandela, we know he was in prison for 27. I was like, no, I'm not asking about Mandela, I'm asking about Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Who's she? What role did she play? And I said, this is a research for you. Next week I'm bringing ice cream, guys. Whoever is gonna get it. And for me it was quite interesting because my approach, it was highly influenced by our colleagues in Brazil. And connecting it to Amawetu, it's because things that I came to realize after I'm 40 years of age. I imagine if I would have learned those things when I was young, my way and perspective in terms of my approach in my work. So what if I look internally, then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to start working with the little ones, feed them more about the Robert Mangaliso Sobuku, the Stephen Bantu Biko, so that they may know and be strengthened in who they are. By the time they start creating work, the kind of work that I create, it will be much more stronger and even way better than what I've been doing. And so my approach was indeed influenced by my colleagues in Brazil and how they, history of the people within the transatlantic, or the southern part of America, and how it has influenced their politics. I guess the most profound thing for me was relatability. How we build on festivals and with the aim of bringing vibrancy but changing the economic structure, especially in the township, and it becomes a futile exercise if one does not understand the needs and what the township and the people in the township, what they yearn for, what they seek to receive, And when I went to the conference, there was quite a lot of people from indigenous, the people from Brazil who were basically talking about there's no understanding in programs that are being imposed on them, be it by individuals who might have money to do those, and what is mainly necessary and what they need or they yearn for in terms of the changing of their environment. And so I started really looking at what is it that in the Val, young people and old people, in terms of what we are offering, how are they relating with it? And what is really the connection that we could really start fueling or feeding on that will also allow us, beyond us achieving and say that in terms of our key performance indicators or our annual performance plan, we've achieved this, but the impact thereof of our community, it lies on understanding the basic needs of for instance, we have a festival coming now, December 17, where we will be having the amazing people such as Zoe Mudiras, Java, Buhlebindalo, and but we also ensuring that we need to create stalls for our community, for our mothers who will be selling mleko, the chicken that is cooked from home, so in terms of us saying that, okay, fine, we're doing this and we're going to gain so much from this, we're going to do this, it was quite important to also understand that our involvement of our immediate community, that they end up feeling that we own this is something that does not only belong. And this takes me to our excursion when we went to Bloemfontein. This was 2020, 21? Before COVID. It was before COVID, yeah. And how it was quite shocking for me to see that most of the business that is there, it really does not benefit people, the immediate community in Bloemfontein. Even how they would outsource the marquees, the sound, barricading of the space and all of that. And all of that for me really spoke to ensuring that you involve your community. Even the incident that we had where bags were stolen from the car, if we involve the community to become marshals and securities, we know that we are protected. So this notion of relatability and finding something that will involve the immediate community, I guess it was something that I looked at and say, how do we better ourselves?
samukela zonke izizukulwane zamakhosi esizithu izizukulwane zodingane sezoyitha ezifani zamululu zamufela manje zokunyama nyamela wa siyanamela Roto kaputa. Singwe fune simpunga sesikole. Yithi kwenzakalani ke mhlambe komuzeni? Dat is meenem. Dan lees dan niet zo aan van jaren. All rise!
Thank you so much to our colleagues from Lutando Arts Academy for sharing that excerpt from their work. And as I said earlier, it's really important to us to be sharing these practices, even as they move between very different spaces. This last recording was made in a professional theatre that was developed in the context of the Arts Academy that Luyanda was speaking to. And that brings us to our final input from the fourth collective, which is really made up of colleagues and postgraduate students at the University of the Witwatersrand, where I work. Our first speaker is going to be Nompumelelo Mabuza, who is a PhD candidate, who also plays a leading role in a music organization in Johannesburg. And she'll be reflecting on what our exchanges have meant for her. After that, you're going to hear the voices of two of our members, Mark Arana, who is a PhD candidate at WITS, who is from and is doing research in India. And you will also hear the voice of Dr. Cara Stacey, who is my colleague at WITS. And they're speaking as members of a collective within the WITS group that are co-researchers in a project called Recentering Afro-Asia, really looking at the circulations historically of musics and ideas and peoples in the Indian Ocean basin. So in many ways, South Africa is thinking in stereo about histories of global circulations in the Atlantic world and the Indian Ocean world. And the video ends with some contextualization from me, after which we look forward to the Q&A, and we'll go straight into the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it has been beneficial at different levels. One of them is just how the different teams, especially from Brazil, have learned from some of their predecessors in terms of how to approach music teaching in general, I think that has been quite insightful. I think there is a natural appreciation for what that does for the research that I'm currently doing or conducting through Wits University for my PhD. It enables one to also reflect in terms of how other countries have been impacted by some of the developments that we've seen throughout history in terms of the music industry in general. It's amazing to hear some of the developments that you see in India, for example, and how that, the music industry shapes the culture there. In fact, with them, it's so intertwined with film as well. And then to learn from the Brazilians just how their communities, the voices that come from their communities contribute to the shape of the music industry within their country, but globally, they have had a unique journey. And so that insight of being able to see how other countries' journeys have been around music and how music has transformed and changed over the years from your what type of instruments are used there to the types of music genres to how music tells the story of a people, which is quite parallel to South Africa in that regard. And so that's why I'm saying the impact and the benefit has been quite diverse, but it enriches one's journey and one's research, the work that I'm doing right now. And so I really, really appreciate the interaction, the collaboration that we've been really privy to in terms of sound praxis. I think just if I can just start with, talking about people who have been, or over the years were marginalized, and how they are embracing their identity and how that resonates within the music industry and what that looks like. I think that is quite familiar for us, and it just, I think, helps us in our thinking, in our analysis of our own country and our own journeys, to then open up our minds and begin to understand that actually, these kind of journeys, although different, but in essence, we are all looking for that identity, that sense of pride, that sense of belonging that you find in South Africa and Brazil, India even, and Mozambique, different countries. And so, I think there's lots of what is common that we've been able to learn from the collaboration, but also just how different and how what it looks like in the different countries.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shall we to last to the
As diverse performer researchers engaging in research in regions in and around Africa, West and South Asia, our team engages with performance within academic and research spaces in multiple ways. This collective work has taken the form of a series of creative productions that have woven together historical research and narrative, visual art, music, and theatrical performance. Today, we draw on two main productions of this type in our reflections. The first was titled Ife and Bilal, and the process of its construction creatively explored concepts relating to the pre-colonial Indian Ocean. This process led us to develop characters that represented different aspects of the Indian Ocean system: sea, slaves, merchants, folklore, and mythical creatures. The resulting production took the form of a 45-minute-long visual and sonic creative experience performed in Johannesburg and Cape Town in late 2018. In a live, improvised creation using sound and visuals, the work explored the Indian Ocean as an archive and an agent, echoing the past with the present. Gabriel's Odyssey is a musical narrative drawn from the 16th century Goan Inquisition testimony of an Ethiopian man, known as Gabriel or Alihan. Kidnapped as a small child from the Ethiopian highlands, he was sold into slavery and spent 2 decades in Arabia before he was sold again and taken to the Ahmednagar Sultanate in India. The testimony documents various movements, religious conversions, and moments of capture. It is from this historical text that we, as an ensemble, created a multi-part musical narrative and live performance. Though we performed Gabriel's Odyssey in Cape Town in 2021, this work is ongoing. Research examining Gabriel's agency and motivation is nearing completion and will be woven into the new version of this production in 2025. There were a few central theoretical themes that have guided our creative process over recent years. Firstly, there is the idea that one knows through doing. Tim Ingold writes about the maker as a participant in amongst a world of active materials, and provokes one to think of two possible ways of knowing and studying, as transformational and documentary. When approaching distant historical research queries with slim material resources to consult, there is an argument to be made for how appropriate and constructive a complementary transformational research experience may be, rather than a sparse and perhaps inaccurate documentary one. Diana Taylor extends this idea of transformational research dialogue, writing about the power of performance to enable individuals and collectives to reimagine and restage the social rules, codes, and conventions that prove most oppressive and damaging.
By imagining our characters and recreating places, seascape scenarios, and historic routes, we attempted to provoke thought amongst ourselves and our audiences about not only what these types of lives may have been like, but how this type of historically informed creative methodology may succeed and fail. Grimshaw, Owen, and Ravitz write, quote, "Conceiving of the two practices as either perfectly analogous or categorically distinct results in an erasure of the critical rhythm, the blockages and flows between them. As our initiatives reveal, the space between is in fact what is critical," end quote. Finally, our process in these productions has become a type of collaborative compositional praxis, destabilizing the ideological silos of individualistic work. As we push back against dominant historical narratives and silences, working together as a group models the dialogue we aim to have with the available material for each story and project. In closing, we see the creation of these musical productions as works of artistic research. Drawing on Hanula, Suranta, and Vaden's writing on artistic research, this assertion is supported by the following. Firstly, the artwork and artistic experientiality are the focal points of our endeavor. Secondly, our research aims to be self-reflexive, self-critical, and an outwardly directed communication. Thirdly, this work draws on a diversity of research methods, presentation methods, and communication tools. And finally, we're producing information that serves practice and develops methods critically. The reflexive nature of our collaborative compositional processes, as well as the fact that these are dialogical and iterative public performances, speaks to our aim to critique fixed narratives and closed research outcomes. The works are presented as evolving as our understanding of the material evolves, and we work as a collaborative to explore it and find further performance and conversational spaces for it.
Greetings, colleagues from Johannesburg, and thank you for your interest and attention to our dialogue today. I'm going to move to wrap up the contributions of our respective collectives by offering a few observations about the ongoing dialogues that we're having within and across the four collectives who have presented today. And I want to do this by placing our dialogue in a broader and longer historical context. I see our efforts as music and dance scholars pursuing reflexive action in our respective contexts within a transnational history that spans at least a half century. In making this point, I'm going to refer to an important article which was actually initially a keynote address that was offered all of 36 years ago in August 1988, amidst the height of anti-apartheid struggle and an official state of emergency in South Africa. It's an address by the highly respected late South African educator, theorist, and activist Neville Alexander. In an address titled Liberation Pedagogy in the South African Context, Alexander recognized in 1988 what he called the explosion of liberation pedagogy in late apartheid South Africa. This was also known by other terms such as education for liberation, alternative education, or people's education. Alexander saw these initiatives not only as a response to the oppression attending apartheid within South Africa, but also within a wider international context, what he referred to as the revolt of the youth against the authoritarianism of their parents and against the acquisitive society to which an unfettered capitalist system had given rise. The struggle for an alternative education that would advance liberation thus included the quest for redistribution, viewed from the perspective of class, while also attending to the imperatives of racial and gender equality and decolonization. Although Alexander recognized an existing set of practices as the New Left distanced itself from the actually existing avowedly socialist states of the time, he argued that what was common to struggles for educational alternatives across the world was the attempt to realize democracy and self-determination in practice. Theories of education of the time were thus also revolutionized by new radical pedagogies. The key point that Alexander made for the purposes of our dialogues today, 36 years later, as I've said, is that the whole concept of an alternative education in South Africa was deeply influenced by the Brazilian philosopher of education Paulo Freire's visions and methods. And this resonates strongly with the ongoing dialogues we're sharing today. For Alexander, the fundamental difference between Freire's pedagogy and most other radical pedagogies of that period was his insistence on the link between personal and social liberation, which Freire called conscientization, which revolves, of course, around the concept of praxis. There's a key historical observation that Neville Alexander also offered, and that is that the translation into English of Freire's work around 1970 made a major impact among activists for alternative education in South and Southern Africa. Alexander rehearsed in his address how Freire's ideas had been introduced to the university Christian movement and through it to the South African student organization in around 1970. And I find it interesting to see how liberation theology speaks to liberation pedagogy historically at the time. Although the government banned Freire's works, about 500 or more copies of Pedagogy of the Oppressed made the rounds at the so-called Bush colleges or black universities in South Africa, where they were eagerly studied by the young activists of the Black consciousness movement. In Freire's works, they saw, as Alexander pointed out, a mirror image of that they rejected in the apartheid government's so-called Bantu education system. Informal courses in Freire's methods were conducted at various universities, earning them, including my own university, Wits, the label of breeding grounds for communism by some in the government. Some of the students and others who participated began conducting literacy and other conscientization projects in urban and some rural townships. Freire's pedagogical method of combining education and culture with conscientization and politicization accorded with the views of the Black consciousness movement in South Africa and was subsequently adopted by the broader liberation movement. Now, Alexander acknowledged that the banning of the Black consciousness movement in 1977 interrupted many of those projects, but that they were carried out in more or less adapted forms ever since. And I hope that the work that we are doing today, albeit in apparently post-revolutionary South Africa, which however accords with Alexander's description of pre-revolutionary expectation, is something that I'd like to contribute to our conversation. And so, in revisiting the historical developments, as well as Alexander's telling of them, I'm led by way of conclusion to end with a few questions we continue to wrestle with within our sound praxis exchanges, into which we would welcome dialogue with practitioners elsewhere, both in the Q&A today, but please write to us if you'd like to keep talking about these mutual interests and concerns. Firstly, what does it say about the state of our current world that the conditions against which Freire and other radical pedagogues of the 1960s and 70s were writing still arguably prevail? Secondly, as Professor Samuel Araujo has on more than one occasion asked us, can the work of sound praxis merely hope to reform how we function within existing macro power structures and relations? Or can it really help to replace them? And to cite Alexander one more time, our dialogue today, as well as our ongoing efforts in our four collectives, helps to amplify an intention that informs our work: the integral relationship between local, national, and international developments and ideas, and to the consequent importance of what Alexander argued in the late 1980s we ought to be placing to studies in comparative education, how these praxes are being understood and implemented in our respective contexts. And I think in the fields of alternative, liberatory approaches to the teaching and study of music and dance. And so with these questions and provocations, I thank you and look forward to further dialogue. So at this point, we are open for questions and comments, and we're really grateful to everyone for your attention. Hermínio, please come in. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you very much. Good to see you too. Okay, let me start by thanking the organizers of this dialogue. It is quite insightful. It is quite empowering, and and at the same time, thought-provoking. Now, I've got two comments only, not questions, but comments. The first one concerns the presentation from Mozambique, I think by the first presenter and partly the second, where he was talking about decolonization and was referring to the terminology that is used around an instrument that we call mbira. Yes, that's very, very, it's a big concern in terms of how, can I say, scholarship has intervened and to some extent introduced certain terminologies that were then popularized internationally and are now being used today. Yet if we trace back, we tend not to find them the way they are used now. I don't know whether I'm adding confusion to the dialogue concerning the name mbira. To say, as it is used now, it's almost used like a an umbrella or a class of any instrument that has got a wooden soundboard and some metal keys. Yet, we have instruments with their individual names. I think the guy from Mozambique, the guys from Mozambique, they know an instrument called Njari. That's its name. We don't go beyond that. There is an instrument called Karimba. That's its name. It goes like that. There are several mbiras. If you cross Zambezi and go up, there's also Likembe and so on. We can keep on enumerating such names. But we are now having this scenario where the word mbira is almost referring to any instrument, which is confusing a little bit, because through my various researches on the instrument, I did discover that the culture bearers of yesteryear do not call it mbira. They call it marimba. And I'm saying, how can that be? And I'm connecting with the marimbas that were invented at College of Music. Is it what? Kwanengoma College in Bulawayo. And I'm saying that's not Zimbabwean by origin. It is a development of the chop instruments. So where did this marimba came from? It might appear as if the word marimba was hijacked from what we are calling mbira today. And there was no any other name to give. That's why sometimes we say mbira zavadzimu, we say nare, we say mbira huru. We have a confusion over that name. So thank you very much for unearthing that dialogue, which we should continue to look at. Then the last thing is about the gentleman from South Africa who touched. In fact, his inspiration is to see youngsters being empowered and transformed. That's a very powerful vision. We are also having a project that we are doing with Amanda, who is also with us now, in Kwando, whereby we are transforming lives of youths using ethnomusicological approaches so that they sort of transform their life and stop misusing time and doing certain things that are not socially accepted. So thank you very much. Without eating time for others, I thank you for giving me time to comment. Thank you.
We thank you so much for that input. And I'm wondering, Borges, would you like to come in and respond on behalf of the Mozambican group? I know Mikash has had to get onto a plane.
Yes. Good afternoon. Terminus is my Tivara. Good afternoon, Tivara, and many thanks for the.
We are meeting once again.
Yes, thank you for this comment and question, which is really enriching. Mikash cannot answer because he's flying right now. His flight is about to depart from Maputo. But therefore, I might not be very certain in answering the question. But for as much as I understand, I have understood Mika's position in this case of terminologies, nomenclatures. He defends that if we use the native or traditional names, including their pronunciations, including their meaning within the context they belong to, which means that there's so many names that you have mentioned for instruments that are similar to mbira and are known as mbira. If we use those names and understand the context in which they have these names, then we will be working towards an education, a musical arts education that is accountable for the culture, for the local culture, is sensitive to that culture. That's where also I, Mikash, and Luca work together within the umbrella of Riamos, which starts by re-valorization, this discussion that we look at preservation, conservation, and the other way mostly used it's not recovering, but it's something similar to recovering of our practices, like contexts that are being imposed by those colonial ideas, whilst what we need is to bring back the value of these practices, which we have been pushed to believe in things and to name them in ways and to deal with them in perspectives that do not do not give that value to the people who live with them. And I myself defend that our arts have not disappeared. Therefore, they resist, and you find them, for example, in Brazil. For how many years have people been taken from Africa to Brazil, and they still today claim for Africanity? And we ourselves had some practices forbidden to be practiced publicly. And on my research, I found that these practices still existed. And therefore, if we believe and agree to preserve them, what are we doing? We are putting them in a shell, an inviolable shell. In some place, like a museum, as Dr. Lucas says, in a museum where one can go and see how elephant used it to be, how a dinosaurs used it to be, and what that image works for. Because culture, the arts are dynamic. We still have that DNA, and how do we work within that DNA for the days of today? I think this is what Mika's contribution has brings within this scope of names. How do we name the instruments, our instruments? How do we take into account their meaning? How do we take into account how they are said? For example, let me just take half a minute maybe. For example, in Portuguese, we have male and female in everything. We say, for example, for mbira, usually people say ambira because it ends with an A, it's a feminine. But within our cultures, that does not exist. I prefer to say mbira instead of putting that feminine article before and say ambira. But one can say that in Portuguese, o piano, which is male for the piano, because that's Portuguese, it's fine. But for mbila, for example, which is marimba, you spoke about mbila. If you give it a feminine name, how do we know this is feminine and we make it feminine? So I think this is the main ideas I can bring to discuss within Mika's thought of the nomenclature. Thank you.
Thank you, Borges, and I'm pleased to see that Mikash has been able to at least be in touch via text or in the chat. So Sui Beng has asked us an important question that I'd like to put to the collectives. Perhaps just to notice in responding to this dialogue actually between Borges and Hermínio, that instrument making has emerged as an interesting point of convergence among several of our groups. Not only the mechanics and practicalities of musical instruments, but quite a deep sense of the knowledges, musical and spiritual, that are located in this. And there might be someone in our Brazilian collective who'd like to speak to this as well. But let's look at the question that Sui Beng has posed to us. Could the collectives tell us more about the social changes that have occurred through collaborative praxis, right? And this really goes to the heart of what we aim to do in this sort of work. Is there anyone in the Brazilian group who would like to take on this question? Please just open your camera and your microphone.
We need translation, Brett. We need translation to Brazilian. Please.
Borges, can you please help with this?
Yes, but Alina is here. She's already on with the mic. Let me allow her to do this, if she really accepts.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Alina.
Everyone. Pedro e pessoal, a pergunta foi sobre as transformações, se os coletivos, foi na verdade uma pergunta geral para todos os grupos, se os grupos poderiam falar mais sobre as transformações sociais advindas das ações colaborativas. Essa pergunta, eu acho que estava presente já no vídeo, né? Mas eu acho que a ideia é para falar um pouco mais sobre. Alguém? So Pedrinho and Carol is coming to talk to us.
Hello, pessoal. I think I speak in Portuguese because the colleagues in Brazil don't speak in English. Okay, nice. Eu acredito que as transformações sociais que a gente vai verificando, né, ao longo desse trabalho colaborativo, eles poderiam estar girando em torno, principalmente, eu acho que relacionado a coisas que a gente vê, né, do grupo, né, assim, sei lá, conseguindo trabalhos melhores, dinheiro, né, a gente conseguindo fazer...
Pedrinho, let me just... deixa eu só traduzir um pouquinho para eles, pode ser? So, Pedrinho is saying that he's going to answer in Portuguese because of the other Brazilian colleagues that are here at this activity. And so he's saying that the social transformations that shows the impacts of this collaborative actions that we've been through are coming as material impacts they can see regarding work and professional activities. And pode seguir, Pedrinho.
Obrigado, Aline. Acho que principalmente no campo das artes, né, da música, isso é uma transformação efetiva que a gente vê hoje. O estúdio funciona, traz trabalho, traz renda, né, não só para a própria escola, que é uma escola autônoma que vive desse dinheiro, como também para as próprias pessoas do coletivo, né, moradores do Complexo do Alemão.
So he's saying, especially through music and cultural productions, so they have this studio that was built as an impact, an effect of these collaborations as well. And through this studio, they have money impact, and they can have cultural productions and community productions and help each others.
Obrigado. Isso seria um exemplo, mas hoje, por exemplo, a maioria das pessoas que eram do Ocupa Alemão, que foi o coletivo que gerou a escola, estão, por exemplo, fazendo faculdade ou concluindo cursos de graduação, alguns já concluíram. E a gente sabe que aqui no Brasil, por exemplo, a formação universitária ainda é, né, um motor importante de ascensão social, né? Melhores trabalhos, melhores empregos, muitos já estão trabalhando no chão.
And so after, since the Ocupa Alemão, which was the first movement that started the Kilombist school, there are several young people that are nowadays at the universities, ones that are graduating and have already been working professionally through these learnings, aspects that they gain through the Kilombist school and the collaborations they have been engaged in.
E para concluir, só dizer que hoje, né, a maior parte dos educadores, dos criadores da escola, são exatamente esses jovens, né? Então a ideia é que numa próxima geração, as crianças que estão conosco, os adolescentes, também possam, né, viabilizar essa ascensão a partir desse ciclo de início, meio e início. Obrigado.
So as Carol said in her video, many of these young people are nowadays the teachers of the Kilombist schools, and we expect that in some years now forward, we can see the nowadays students of the Kilombist schools being the teachers from the further generations, and continuing this cycle of beginning, middle, and beginning.
Thanks so much, Alina, and also to Pedrinho. Borges, would you like to, please, I see your hand is up, to respond to Suibeng?
Yes. I would like to add to what Pedrinho just said. One of the good things that we are having, like impact, for example, from this sound praxis exchange, is that I had never met, for example, Pedrinho, but now we are working together in, I think, two projects. One of them includes taking native Timbila builders from Mozambique, from Zavala, to Brazil, if we have the funding, if our proposal is approved, and to work with Mestre Espírito Santo, who is also has been for years trying to understand the construction of Mbila, and they ended up constructing an instrument which is, he knows it as Mbila, Timbila. Okay, many people will understand if I say Timbila, but Timbila is a singular and Timbila is plural. So I think this is starting to bring some impact, in a real impact in the societies, because if we can do this and we bring together two peoples and we go back to the roots, we find where we start from all together. I think this is something that is worth working for. I wanted to add this, Brett.
Thank you, Borges. And I'm wondering if any of our colleagues from the Afro-Asia group might want to also just weigh in on how they see this question about the social changes that have occurred through collaborative praxis, knowing that we've come at it from an artistic research point of view, which has its own implications in an academic setting and the knowledges we privilege. So anyone in the group, although of course we've got members who didn't have the chance to speak in the presentation, it would be great to hear from anyone. Can I point this in your direction first or next? And so I suppose I'm looking to...
Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, Bronwyn or Christy. Would you like to go, Bronwyn, and perhaps Christy after you?
Christy has her hand up, so let Christy
Oh,
go first.
apologies. She's on my other screen. Christy, please come in, and then let's go to Bronwyn afterwards.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I've really enjoyed being part of it. I think what's interesting for me, and certainly what's come out of our group collaborations, is the opportunity to work across disciplines. For me, coming from a fine art background, working with musicians, I think in terms of social change, we aren't kind of doing the big impact because we're a small collective, and our work is also largely kind of academic, but certainly the opportunity to work with musicians, to make work together, has really changed my processes of writing and thinking. And I think that these are the kinds of changes that need to happen in the university. So, yeah, I think in terms of social change, there's definitely more of a move to practice and experimentation through the kinds of work that we're doing. Over to you, Bronwyn.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, I would just reiterate what Christy has said, that the
the tangible social change that I can see in our collaboration is through working with across different mediums, as well as working with musicians and artists from very different contexts. And so we're working with people from Ethiopia, Zanzibar, India, and South Africa. And so that's when we have actually worked together, that's given us the opportunity and the challenge to work across languages, which thankfully music could, music and the visual expression of the storytelling could take the place of language at times, or speaking. But then the less tangible examples of social change are in the reimagined worlds that we've created in the performance. And yeah, we're recreating, or we're allowing the audience or the people experiencing the performance to reimagine a very dark history. So that's another layer of how social change has come into what we're doing. I think Mark has something to say. Thank you.
Please, thanks so much, Bronwyn and Christy. Mark, please come in.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I was going to say something along the lines of what you were saying, so I'll just continue from there. So our work has largely been on historical narratives, and it's been, we create works out of stories and songs from the distant past. So it might seem, on the surface of it, that it's not immediately applicable, or immediately suitable for social change. But I feel that what we did do was to create awareness of the stories that did take place, or the kind of, the kind of migrations that took place, and also simply the nature of the world before colonization. Before colonization of the Afro-Asian body, the body that was the body of space that was organized around the Indian Ocean, and it was a world where multiple languages, non-European languages coexisted, and people were communicating and singing and dreaming in those languages. So I think that was that's definitely one of the key social, or rather outward impacts of our work. Thanks.
Thanks so much, colleagues. Cara, not to put you on the spot, but would you like to maybe add anything?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'll just add a quick thing, because I realize we've all had a chance to speak, and maybe some other people from other collectives would like to add something else. But just to follow on from that, I think that there's some interesting links with the work that's happening in Brazil and in Mozambique, in that the work that we're doing is about performance. There's a lot that we can't measure in terms of impact, because we're interfacing with audiences who come in, experience what we're doing, and then go out. So a lot of the kind of takeaways, I guess, are very anecdotal, but I think that's a really important part for me, is that it's about the potential of performance. It's about music making. It's sometimes about moving a little bit away from traditional academic thought and writing in the way that we've been trained, and really trying to really refocus things on this kind of live, imagined moment that we share with audiences. So yeah, I'll just end it there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Cara. And in passing back to Sui Beng, I'll just add that I've received text messages from Rianda, who's in Sao Paulo, and also Jesse, who's working with his students. They haven't been able to connect with us for the Q&A, but they will look at the recordings and they thank us for an engagement. Sui Beng, back to you to wrap up. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for this wonderful and insightful discussion and dialogue. I think we really appreciate your sharing with us, and I think your work is really inspiring, and it also helps us to think through what we are doing at ICTMD as well. So this is the last session of the dialogues for 2024. We actually hope that these dialogues will stimulate more discussion, and also we can continue the conversations at the next World Conference, which will take place in Wellington, New Zealand, in January 2025. So thank you very much, and we see you in Wellington, New Zealand. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.